We're taking you now to Melbourne. This is a forum exploring solutions to violence against women. ABC Radio's Ali Moore is hosting this. Forum participants include the Victorian Premier and the Victorian Police Commissioner. We'll be on this for quite some time. I'll be back in around 20 minutes or so with headlines.
And Emma Bates. And yet Victoria has arguably done more than any other state to try to address gender violence. The Royal Commission into Family Violence in 2015 made 227 recommendations. The government says it's now implemented all of them. Still, police are responding to an average of domestic incident every 6 minutes, arresting a perpetrator every 18 minutes. That's an average of 80 family violence offenders every single day. This forum is not about blame, but about trying to find the solutions. Why is it so hard? What are we not doing that we should be doing? What are the answers? Because we know there is no single thing which will end this diabolical problem. With us this afternoon, a panel of people who can help to bring change and an audience with lived experience across the services who can help inform the debate. And of course you, wherever you are listening, what are your answers? Join the conversation, 1300 222 774. So to our panel, we have the Premier Jacinta Allen with us, a politician with the power to make a real difference. We have the Chief Commissioner of Victoria Police, Shane Patton, representing all those frontline officers who see this up close absolutely every day. Will Olstergren, the Chief Justice of the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia, representing the court system where victims and perpetrators so often end up. We have Dr. Christine Craig, a survivor with her own lived experience, which informs her work as a family violence social worker. And Karen Isles. Karen is an Indigenous woman, a victim and a lawyer who represents women and First Nations clients. Welcome all, and a huge thank you for being here this afternoon. Premier Allen, if I can start with you, before we get to National Cabinet. As I just said, we've had a Royal Commission, 227 recommendations, a lot of money, a lot of work, and still the problem is growing, not diminishing. What else can you do as a government?
Ali, that's a question that we are working on right now, and we're doing that from that position that we're coming from a foundation that was very different to where we were 8 years ago when we received that Royal Commission report in 2016, and the Chief Commissioner and I and other senior representatives from Victoria Police had a meeting yesterday, and we talked about how before the Royal Commission, before the recommendations, before the implementation of those recommendations, we didn't have a system. We do today. We have a system where there has been substantial reform and change in Victoria Police, strengthening the response, the agencies who work and support women and children at their point where they're seeking out for support when they're having been victims of family violence. There's a huge amount of work that's gone into reforming how information is shared to better support women and children at that point in time. The work that I see as a mum with my kids' school with respectful relationships, it's about teaching kids at the earliest of age how to show respect and how to be strong and resilient people into the future. But we know that we need to do more. Clearly, as you said in your introduction, it's just unacceptable that there is this ongoing pattern of violence against women, which is why some time ago now I've asked the key ministers involved, the Attorney General, the Minister for Women, we have a Minister for Prevention of Family Violence, Vicky Ward, who's with us here today, to look at what more we need to do, because, Ali, we absolutely need to do more. In my view, and we might come to this later on, it's in those areas of prevention. It's about cultural change. It's looking at how technology over that period of time has changed, both in how perpetrators use technology to abuse women and children, but also too how technology is also contributing to some of those significant cultural challenges that are perpetrating this ongoing disrespect for women, and we are seeing what happens when women are not being respected.
I guess there's the here and the now, and then there's the longer term solutions, and that is certainly about a next generation of men. And we saw today from National Cabinet the announcements of money, almost $1 billion, going into establishing permanently a program to help women escape violence, a number of measures around online misogyny. but practical things that are happening in some states, so things like electronic monitoring, talk about having a national register. Things like national coordination of intelligence when it comes to intervention orders. We didn't get any news on that. It was kicked down the road for another 3 months to the next national cabinet. Why are those things so hard?
Well, in part they're complex because they're about state systems talking to one another, and I don't want to sound like Ali today. I'm giving an excuse because we do need action. We do need action now, and we do need to look at the system reform changes we can make now. But what came out of National Cabinet today was a determination that we need to take action across the country because violence against women isn't stopping at a state border. We do need some harmonisation in how we respond to this. But what we most certainly need is that national conversation, that national culture shift around why there is this ongoing, and as you said, increasing numbers of men perpetrating violence against women. And so that is why looking at the system responses that go towards the prevention end, because we are clearly seeing the numbers that Shane and his colleagues are seeing, it's continuing to see those numbers go through. So we've got to look at stopping it before it gets to that crisis end, and that's a big part of the work we talked about at National Cabinet
today. But could all the premiers not get together today if they wished, define an intervention order, make national rules that applied in every state and territory for bail and for bail breaches? Why is it that it's so hard to at least get a national standard?
Look, that is a good question. It is one that we talked about today, and we talked about how we do need to better share that information. There was legislation passed in the South Australian Parliament just last night around monitoring, electronic compliance and monitoring, for example. So we do need to get better at sharing and building a national response. But I want to be clear, Ali, we're also not waiting for that national response. We've already started that really critical phase of the work we're doing to build on the changes. And again, if the Chief Commissioner doesn't mind, we talked about this yesterday, where what we can consider now can only be considered as further system reform because we have built the system. We have stronger resources and powers for Victoria Police. We have a stronger sharing of information between our agencies. We've got that foundation that we can now build on in terms of looking at our next set of actions.
So, Chief Commissioner, let me bring you in because a couple of very specific things. Papers this morning have got reports that your frontline members are feeling bail is breached and they can't do anything.
Yeah, Ali, and I read that with interest. Certainly we had a couple of members who raised that. But the reality is the bail reforms that came in, they abolished the offence of committing an offence on bail. It doesn't detract from our ability to remand people. You breach your bail, we grab you, we take you before the courts. We've always been able to do that. The question for our members was, well, why has that offence been abolished? And there were good reasons, because it disadvantaged a lot of specific cohorts. But we still have the power to do that. In fact, the bail laws are quite strong when we take them back before the courts. There is now contained in there that there must be, when they're considering whether an unacceptable risk or not, there must be considerations about the impact in family violence. That's legislated in there now. And so if there's harm, the issue for me isn't about bail at all.
Intervention orders?
Intervention orders, this is an interesting one, and where the Premier says we were speaking yesterday, it's not just yesterday we've turned up at this.
No,
we've been having many discussions over many years and implementing a lot of different things. Over the journey we've raised, last year, police issued around 11,500 family violence safety notices. They're notices police can issue to get someone before the court, and then the court has to do an intervention order. And we've been talking, and there's still some work to be done with the sector and everything, and with government, but we're saying there might be a better way for us to be able to issue an enduring family violence safety notice, so that there's no gap when the perpetrator doesn't appear at court and we've got to try and find them again for service of an interim order, so the victim's immediately protected, so they're not re-traumatised in court by having to confront that person. So there's no silver bullet here.
No, there isn't.
But
there are some very practical things. I mean, for example, just yesterday, Lauren Callaway, who's the Assistant Commissioner of Victoria Police's Family Violence Command, she wrote that perpetrators just do not take breaches of intervention orders seriously. They do not respect them.
Yeah, that's right. Last year there was around 54,000 breaches or thereabouts, and we take them before courts, we lock them up, we charge them with that, and they're sentenced. That's what occurs, that's the reality, but for victims, that's re-traumatising them and they don't take it seriously.
But is there a way of getting intervention orders taken more seriously? Oh,
look, certainly they're matters that the courts deal with in how they sentence in regards to that. But a lot of the people who we are giving the initial family violence safety notice to, then they front up at the courts or don't turn up. We have gaps sometimes before that notice gets put in place. So I think for me it's making sure we got the protection for the victims immediately and expose them to as least trauma as we possibly can. We can't dictate how men, predominantly men, relate to family violence safety notices or intervention notices, how they adhere to them. I think what we're all very much in this room, everyone's clear on, there's a need to get behavioural change for men. There's a need for those men who can only be described as thugs, men who are threatening, harassing, assaulting, intimidating women in family violence and outside of family violence situations. They're the ones who we need to have the behavioural change programs so that we can change how they do see that and that they do respect those notices when they have a breach.
In terms of what's in your purview, though, what do you need? If you've got that many arrests every day, I don't know how you do anything else, really. Do you have the resources you need?
Yeah, we do have the resources. We're very well resourced, but it takes up a heck of a lot of our time. But the culture now has changed completely from, as the Premier said, 2000 and with the Royal Commission 2015-16, that completely changed the way we approach family violence. It meant that it wasn't any longer seen as something that we have to do over here. It's a core policing value. It's a core policing attribute, and it is about safety. We've implemented a family violence command with an assistant commissioner in charge. We have 29 family violence investigation units across the state that have 360 people. We have sexual offence and child abuse investigation teams, 500 detectives across the state. It is an absolute focus for us. And as the Premier said, we keep going back to government and talking with them, and we do have incremental improvements along the way. For instance, one of the key issues, an indicator when we do risk assessments now, is about strangulation and how that can indicate further violence. And government listened to us and are implementing legislative reforms in relation to that. So, as I say, there's no single silver bullet here. It's an incremental progression, and the Premier rightly described. I think it would be fair to say we didn't have a whole-of-system approach back then. We do now, and we're very joined up. Is it perfect? No, not by far. But as we come up with new innovations, new ideas, that's what we do. We work through them.
Dr. Christine Craig, can I bring you in here? How much do you think has changed since the Royal Commission?
Not a lot for women on the ground, I have to say. And most women, I think it's only about 20% that actually contact the police. So the size of the problem is enormous. And I think with the intervention orders, I don't understand why it isn't a condition of every intervention order that a man must attend and complete a men's behaviour change program. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to fix everything, but for 22 to 23 weeks, that perpetrator will have eyes on him, and the partner worker will have eyes on the partner. So we know for the first half year of an intervention order, we will have eyes on what's going on as much as we can with those families, some other way to monitor risk, but they're not a condition of every intervention order. And also...
But before you move on, let's put that straight to the Commissioner. Would you support that?
Oh, it's something we wouldn't be opposed to. I mean, the reality is, what's the practicalities about that, and is it achievable? I mean, that's...
Well, it is true. There would need to be a lot more money going into
but also, there are variances in intervention orders, and I'm not saying a breach might be a text.
Sure. But Christine understands that. I mean, you know, that there are differences.
So when we talk about every time, there would have to be nuances associated with that, I think.
Premier, would you consider it?
Look, this is what we're looking at in terms of, I mentioned earlier, the work that's happening again across government. We are absolutely wanting to hear from Victoria Police, hear from people who work in the sector and people with lived experience, because we know we need to look at what more we can do. And I think if I can pick up one of the important elements, what I think is an important element of what Christina's just said, it's about changing men's behaviour. All the work that we've done through the Royal Commission and the system reform has quite rightly been focused on supporting women who are victims of family violence and their children. But clearly now what we are seeing, as you said, Ali, the numbers going up, we have to look at changing men's behaviour, changing the attitudes, looking at the interventions and supporting men to understand the consequences of some of these actions.
So, Christine, that's one thing, one very concrete thing you've talked about.
Yeah, and that won't happen until we change the culture. Yep. Of course, it's not going to happen, and we can't take away from services to victim survivors.
That's
so from the safe steps and the housing and all the crisis work, we need that absolutely while that's going on. And the other thing I know is a lot of perpetrators do use intervention orders as a weapon, as a threat, sort of like the police don't take a breach seriously. It's just a piece of paper. I am not... Go ahead, take it out, it's not going to make any difference to me. And I have to tell you, the number of women I've worked with that can't get the police to move on a breach is heartbreaking. You know, they just don't feel like there's anywhere safe.
Could I just add in, because if you said we're passionate about something, I'm passionate about that.
Yeah.
I can't speak for every example or singular issue that you're talking about, but I can assure you that we have a pro-arrest strategy, a apprehension policy. Our total focus is on victim safety and perpetrator accountability. And so that really does surprise me, and I'd love to follow up on it, because from my point of view, that will be an absolute huge disappointment to me. And certainly I agree back in the past that when I say the past, we still don't get everything right all the time now. I absolutely concede that. But by and large, with all of those areas of expertise that I've just spoken of and the pro-arrest, victim-centric approaches we have and the protocols that people are supposed to adhere to in my organisation, it really does surprise me.
That's one good concrete thing. I've got to move on because I'm very cognizant of the fact that we're going to have news headlines very soon. But Will Olstergren, let me ask you, from your perspective, sitting in the family court, what do you think is the biggest failure in the court system? And we've talked about already the sharing of information. There is no formal sharing of information between the courts in Victoria, which have jurisdiction over intervention orders, and the family court.
No, there's actually information agreements, if you like. We have also co-location of police and child protection agencies, which is so incredibly important. But there is no formal database, if you like, that we can go to. We normally have to wait anything from 24 hours to much longer to try and find out what's happened on the state side of things in a case. Unfortunately, many people do actually tell us the information we require and we need to make decisions in the best interest of the child. But sometimes judges aren't equipped with enough information, and we do rely heavily upon state agencies to do it. They're very cooperative, but for instance, there's no database of orders that actually are involved in domestic family violence cases. From a national point of view, it's quite staggering.
So that means you've got to stop the case, send an email, wait for a response, and the whole thing is delayed.
Normally you try and do other things at the same time, but you're right, you do have to, it causes delay. It also, to make a safe decision and be properly informed, often it takes quite a long time to be able to make sure that we actually have the information we need. Having said that, the police forces around the country have been involved. We've actually got co-located police forces, police representatives in most of our courts, or most of the states and territories, and of course the child protective agencies as well. So that does help, but it's certainly not a perfect system. And when you need rapid response, you actually want to make sure you're triaging these cases to keep people safe. That's so incredibly important. So
is something like a national database of intervention orders, is that a live issue?
It certainly has been something I think that's been subject of at least a task force in the Attorney General's Department for many years, and I think it's something which hopefully will actually occur very soon. It's vitally important. It's very important we know from a state point of view what's going on, and also vice versa. We cross-pollinate quite a lot with a lot of these cases. So many cases that come to our court have already been in the state court system for quite a long time, and vice versa, so it is very important we know about them.
You are listening to our special forum where we're looking at the horrific problem that we have in this country of violence against women. We'd love to hear from you as well, 1300 222 774. We will broaden this conversation out and we hope that everyone in the room can contribute, and you too can contribute as well from home. We're going to have a short break for the news headlines in just a minute, and then we'll get to Karen Isles, and then we'll be joined by some of those who not only have lived experience but very much see this problem every day, see the people who are affected by it and have got solutions of their own. They're already running programs, they're already doing things that are actually making a difference every day, and they're all here in this room. So we want to hear from them and we want to hear what they think needs to change. Right now though, we will break for the news headlines and then we will continue this conversation.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so that was live from Melbourne, a forum exploring solutions to violence against women. Participants there we heard from that half hour include the Victorian Premier and the Police Commissioner. I'll be reading some headlines now and we're going to go back to that forum for another half hour. So here are the top stories on ABC News. The federal government will commit almost $1 billion to support victim survivors of domestic violence. The funding will provide up to $5,000 in cash and other financial support to people escaping violent situations. $6.5 million has also been allocated to trial age assurance technologies, which aim to reduce children's exposure to harmful adult content online. Lawyers for Bruce Lehrmann have indicated he will appeal against the judgment in his defamation case against Network 10 and Lisa Wilkinson. Federal Court Justice Michael Lee found on the balance of probabilities Mr Lehrmann raped Brittany Higgins at Parliament House in 2019. His 2022 criminal trial in the ACT Supreme Court collapsed due to juror misconduct with no findings against him. Qantas says it's resolved an issue with its phone app, which allowed customers to access the personal information of other passengers. Some passengers say they could see other people's names as well as their boarding passes. The airline has apologised for the blunder and reassured customers the technical disruption was not a cyber security attack. And property prices have climbed for the 15th month in a row, up 0.5% in April. The national median property price rose to nearly $780,000, with Perth experiencing the largest increase of the capital cities. The data from CoreLogic also shows rents are climbing even faster than house prices. Government security officials have confirmed to the ABC that the Indian government had been behind a spy ring operating in Australia until the so-called nest of spies was disrupted by ASIO in 2020. Until now, the nationality of the foreign operatives had not been publicly known. ASIO previously revealed in 2021 it believed the group had targeted Australian trade and defence secrets.
Last year, for example, one of our investigations focused on a nest of spies from a particular foreign intelligence service that was operating in our country. These spies developed targeted relationships with current and former politicians, a foreign embassy and a state police service. They monitored their country's diaspora community. They tried to obtain classified information about Australia's trade secrets. They asked a public servant about information on security protocols at a major Australian airport. They successfully cultivated and recruited a relationship with an Australian government security clearance holder who had access to sensitive details of defence technology. ASIO acted. We investigated, we identified and we verified this activity. We cancelled the government employee security clearance and we confronted the foreign spies and quietly and professionally removed them from our country.
ASIO boss Mike Burgess there. OK, let's head back to Melbourne now for this forum on exploring solutions to violence against women.
Also, we have to start looking at sexual assault. In the last 10 years, we've had at least 315 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women murdered in this country, not by their partners, but by members of the public. And these men are not necessarily documented, they're not necessarily known to police. And we have to look at the fact that in sexual violence, only 10%, so 90% of women who get sexually assaulted in Australia, and greater for Aboriginal women, women of colour, women with disability, women with dementia, you'd almost put it at 100%, don't even bother to go to police because their confidence in our police is so low that they do not even bother reporting.
Would you put that in a Victorian context as well?
Absolutely. It's consistent across the country, and the data from ABC's own report, Rough Justice, in 2020 demonstrates the consistency of this issue across the country. Last week we've had the release of a report specifically into the ACT's response, and what the data consistently shows year after year after year is that only 10% of women come forward to police to report sexual assault, and when they do, only 10% of those alleged perpetrators, and in fact perpetrators who are convicted, or face any kind of legal consequence.
So because we want to focus on solutions, so from your experience, what is the answer to that?
Absolutely. So the answer is building confidence in our police force, confidence that when you walk into a police station and you report, that police will protect you and prevent further violence occurring against you. So to do that, there are three things that I've been speaking to every state and territory, including Victoria, and the Prime Minister, is three things for police. The first is a duty of care, a duty not to harm and re-traumatise victims. That duty does not exist at the moment, and so many women don't come forward because they fear re-victimisation and re-traumatisation by police. The second is legally enforceable, legislated minimum standards for investigation for certain serious crimes. And the reason that is required is because police operating procedures are not followed. And the report from the ACT last week absolutely demonstrates that.
And the third one?
And the third one is to have independent, transparent, at arm's length from police and not involving police, accountability mechanisms, so that when a duty of care is not followed, when a proper investigation is not done, then there are actual organisations and accountability mechanisms to hold police to account. That is missing in Victoria. The Yuruk Justice Commission has recommended that recently. Commissions all over the country, and those three demands are what I've been asking for the Prime Minister and each state and territory for the last 18 months to implement, and none of that's come through National Cabinet.
Let me put that to, we've got Zoe Daniels, the independent MP, in the audience, and she recently, this morning, in fact, was part of a group of MPs who presented a letter to the Prime Minister with a list of, I wouldn't say demands, but a list of areas you'd like to be looked at. I know the investigation process was one of them, so I can ask you to reflect on that.
The investigation process was one of those, and the purpose of the letter that was sent to National Cabinet was to provide some actual steps to take rather than a set of principles. So the independent crossbench asked for some immediate steps, some medium-term steps, and then some culture change steps. And the idea of mandated police investigation principles was one of those. We also spoke about looking at bail violation and violation of AVOs, as has been talked about, electronic monitoring, taking away character tests that can be put in as evidence in court, and a national register, for example, but also those secondary things that were talked about this morning by National Cabinet around addressing violent online pornography, toxic misogyny online, as well as those big culture change pieces that will take a generation to shift.
Can I ask you, though, as a politician, your reaction to National Cabinet, what was enunciated, such as online, and what was pushed down the road for further conversation, such as a national register?
Look, I think we have a moment right now to shift something, and I don't think this morning was it. I note that the Women's Legal Service of Australia said yesterday that National Cabinet had a real opportunity today to do something. and that didn't happen because the can was kicked down the road. I mean, even, for example, extending the Escaping Violence program and giving $5,000 to women escaping. But to back that in, there was no extra funding for frontline services. There was no extra funding for housing. So where do those women go after they've escaped? Who's supporting them through that process, and where are they being housed, for example? And
straight off that point, in fact, I know sitting right beside you, Zoe, Dr. Chelsea Tobin is with us as well. Dr. Tobin is the CEO of Safe Steps, a family violence response centre. Chelsea Tobin, you have a 24/7, 365-day-a-year place. If a woman rings you today and they are in trouble, will they be able to get all the help they need?
Thank you, Ellie. In terms of your question around practical solutions, anybody who calls us, regardless of gender or sexuality, will get support if they call us, not just women. But I think we have made great progress since the Royal Commission in many areas. But one thing that I find very hard running a service on the ground, we take and make about 150,000 calls a year from people who are scared, so that 80% of people that don't go to police generally come to us or the local Orange store. And, we are still reliant on putting those people that are at serious risk in motels. And this was a contingency measure that's lasted 30 years, and when is enough? So... and
that's not just, I suppose the point has to be made, that's not just about a motel. People might be thinking at home, but OK, that's OK, they're safe. But that is 4 walls and that is on your own, and that is not the right place.
Yeah, so tonight we have over 200 people in a motel.
Wow.
Yeah. And what I find hard, I think there's a lot of innovation that comes from co-developing with lived experience and frontline services that are sort of innovated on the grounds because of response gaps. And so there's proven therapeutic models that are operational and scalable that both give a crisis response but at the same time give secondary prevention. And the critical difference there is the intensive wraparound services that are on site. So if you're scared tonight, you could call us, we'd assess your risk thoroughly, we'd bring you into emergency accommodation, and then you would have police on site doing IVOs, you'd have Centrelink doing safe separation, you'd have teachers, nurses, children's workers, immigration, legal services, and you can be in a very different position in a very short period of time.
Sure. Dr. Tobin, let me just put that straight to the Premier, because that is a really clear example of more money, more help.
Yep, and that example that Chelsea's just given, I am very familiar with that approach because I've got one of those refuge services in my own electorate in Bendigo, and I've seen the difference. I've worked with the agencies who've put that refuge together, and I've seen the difference it has made for women and children. So I think what we are hearing from Chelsea and from Zoe and from Karen and Christine on the panel is examples of what works, and the challenge, I will accept that it is a challenge for those of us in positions of government to look at how we keep building on what works, looking at the evidence-based. It does require resources. We've got working on the system change, and I think the Chief Commissioner
next week.
The Chief, if I could just finish, if the Chief Commissioner I've just are acknowledging we are continuing to build the system. We've got to keep making the change, and I will acknowledge, I'm not going to shirk, that resourcing is part of it. In terms of the state budget next week, Ali, the state budget is next week, but the work that I've tasked the ministers to do will go beyond that state budget window. But state budget is not the only time the government has the capacity to make decisions.
You're listening to our special forum on ABC Radio Melbourne this afternoon, where we're looking at men's violence against women and trying to find really practical solutions to how you stop it. Join the conversation, 1300 222 774. I also, of course, want to let you know if this has caused any concern for you, this conversation that we've been having, you can call 1800-RESPECT, 1800 737 732, or the men's helpline, 1300 789978. I do believe, the Premier, that you need to leave us, so we appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming.
If I can say, Safe Steps are hosting a rally, a vigil tonight, which a number of us
National Remembrance Day.
Yes, so thank you for hosting us this evening. It's a really important conversation.
We appreciate you being part of it. There is, of course, another very important part of this conversation, and that is listening to the perspective of a perpetrator. And to that end, we are joined in our forum this afternoon by Thomas. Thomas was physically and emotionally abusive to his family. He was referred to a behaviour change program. He has reconciled with his family now, and he joins us this afternoon. Thomas, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Ali.
What was the moment that you realised that you needed help?
I was trying to get my eldest to take their shower after school, and they were refusing. They wouldn't do it, and after yelling, I pushed them, and then I thought, no, this is not how things are supposed to go. And yeah, so in a couple of days after that, I called the men's referral line and was referred to the men's behaviour change program. Yeah. It
wasn't just pushing your daughter, though. There had been other things leading up to that, hadn't there?
Indeed. And I didn't see myself as a perpetrator. I had decided, when I was younger, growing up with corporal punishment at home, at school, and just all around me, that I decided, no, this is not how I want to bring up my kids. So even though I had decided that I wasn't going to be like that, I wasn't going to be violent, I didn't recognise all the other parts of violence, and that I was. Yeah, it took going through the program, specifically running through the onboarding process at the start of the program, to realise there was so much more that I didn't think was violence, that I was a perpetrator. Yes.
Thomas, you mentioned there growing up with corporal punishment. What was it about your background, do you think, about your growing up, that led you to that position when you were trying to get your child into the shower?
Well, sorry, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well,
exactly.
I'm wondering what it is in your background, what it was that you learned when you were a child, what it was that you saw.
Well, certainly that I never felt like any of the so-called punishment that I received was directed at changing my behaviour. It was more punishment than consequence, and I never really drew a line between what I was supposed to have known to do in the first place and what happened, and so I worked out later on it was all just about for example, my father's emotional dysregulation and trying to control it by controlling me, but yeah, I didn't recognise that I had to be responsible. I had to say, look, yeah, I feel frustrated. I feel a sense of injustice. I feel all these things, but that doesn't mean that I get to just do whatever I want. I don't get to yell back or hit or anything like that. That's I need to be responsible for my actions. Acting with violence. If violence is the answer, you're asking the wrong questions.
And Thomas, you have a 9-year-old son.
Yes.
Is that what you tell him?
Well, exactly right. If I think of what my father would have done, I don't come at him with a belt and stuff. If he's so upset that he's throwing his stuff around and yelling and stuff, it's like you've got to understand he's doing this for a reason. He's really upset, so you've got to find that empathy. You've got to say, okay, I understand. It's really frustrating when this happens, and especially if it happens again, and these kind of things. But yeah, we need to find the right ways to make the changes we need to see. Or we can address the issues that help that make you feel like this. But yeah, we don't act out like that. We don't hit people. We don't act with violence, because violence doesn't solve anything. It just makes things worse.
Thomas, we really appreciate you joining us this afternoon. It's important to have your perspective, so thank you for being part of the conversation. Also with us today is Tom Manowaring, the Acting Principal Lawyer at Community Legal Centre First Steps Legal. Tom works with people like Thomas. Tom, can I ask you whether what you heard from Thomas, and I mean, I guess, the fact that he didn't know that what he was doing was violent?
Yes, thanks, Ali. And firstly, I think I need to acknowledge how remarkable it is to hear Thomas's story, the level of insight that he's developed by himself. Part of the work that we do is to assist in increasing those opportunities for the development of that insight and accountability in relation to men's use of family violence. There are multiple entry points into those conversations with men, and we see that there's a place for lawyers acting for perpetrators of family violence to be an extension of that web of accountability that we have, another touch point in the system for men. There's something quite unique and special about the lawyer-client relationship, and within the confines of that relationship, we can achieve something quite unique with men who use family violence and explore themes that they may not be able to articulate in other settings.
I guess that we've talked about how it's you've got to stop it before it gets to that point, but would you agree, Tom, that you need to understand how it gets to that point before you can stop others getting to that point?
Absolutely. We need to. The understanding can only be developed in men who use family violence, and it's right that our intervention occurs at the point of crisis. The other systemic changes that need to occur, as it's been pointed out this evening, are multi-generational. Where we can make a difference is in the prevention of this occurring again. And the rubber hits the road for men when they click into the fact that their use of the justice system is not the way to achieve the long-term goals that they're ultimately hoping to achieve. That work is teased out over a long period with lawyers like us at First Step Legal to have them articulate what their true objectives are. Men want the normalisation of their relationships with intimate partners. They want to improve their connection with their children. They want whole-of-life improvements. They want to be well. They want to be well. And it's not in contesting an intervention order that they're achieving those goals. So,
yeah, look, thank you. I think that's a really interesting perspective. I want to come back to our panel, but I also want to ask Martina Ferrara, who is with us this afternoon. Martina is the Melbourne organiser of What Were You Wearing, which of course is the group that was organising the most of the rallies over the weekend aimed at ending sexual violence. Martina, thank you for coming. You've been very much a part of the conversation in recent days. And you've heard this conversation. What would you pull out as one thing that could make a difference?
I think that funding could make a massive difference. And like Karen was saying, we need to reinstate confidence into the police system. And we can do that by giving funding to prevention programs and victim blaming programs, really trained first responders and everyone that deals with victim survivors to give them that confidence that if something happens, they can reach out and not be dealt with victim blame, but actual answers and investigation.
Let me take that point and come back to you, Commissioner, because that is, I guess, taking what Karen said as well, and I'm sure you probably bristle at that, but is there a problem with people not trusting that they will be heard and that they will be appropriately dealt with?
Well, there must be to a degree if we're having people speak to about it here, but that has been an absolute focus for my organisation, for the Victoria Police Force, for a number of years now, because we knew that we didn't have that trust. And many years ago there would have been, if you like, questioning of victims. When victims come in now, the approach is, we believe you. We believe you. And we then try and provide as much support as we can. Our investigators are trained that a victim-centric approach is the primacy. And many times it won't end up in a prosecution, but a victim feels that they've been able to step through a process that's helped them.
But that doesn't tally with what Karen tells us. It's like we're in a parallel universe here.
Yeah, exactly.
It actually doesn't give the picture. It isn't supported by the research. In Victoria, when 80% of women don't report family violence and 90% don't report sexual violence to police, there is a massive trust issue with police. And I'm sorry, but minimising it down to, oh, there might be one or two women, you know, maybe it's just Karen and maybe the woman in the audience that have a problem trusting police. I'm sorry, but no, 80% of women in Victoria who experience family violence go nowhere near a police station, and 90% who are sexually assaulted. And for Aboriginal women, when they go near a police station, my advice to my clients who are Aboriginal is take a lawyer, because you will be misidentified yourself as a perpetrator and you will probably end up getting charged. So there is a massive problem with police.
Commissioner, can I allow the Commissioner to respond?
Yeah, as I said, I can only reiterate what I've said, that our primary focus is about a victim-centric approach, and without getting into the nuances of it, there are many reasons why women don't go to police to report matters. There may be trust issues. There may be other issues. They don't want to go through a whole court process.
But do you agree that there are things that can be done, and that particularly for Indigenous women, there is clearly there is something that is stopping them coming to the people who should be there to help them?
We will do everything we can to do that. I mean, we want the public to trust us. We want victims to trust us, and that's what we've been focusing on. We have multidisciplinary centres. We have a joined-up approach. We are out there doing everything we can. We have quite strict protocols and policies in relation to how we deal with victims and how we update them, how we support them, and as I said, how we believe them. I understand what's been said here, but I can only tell you what our absolute focus is, because we want the trust of victims. We want victims to be reporting to us, and we want them to be able to accept that we are there for them.
Well, Ostrigan, can I ask you, I mean, this trust issue is actually really important, isn't it? Because it's not just law enforcement and, you know, going to a police station, making a first report. It's feeling that you are going to be looked after the whole way through the system.
It's certainly that there's a safe system and a fair system of justice, and I totally accept that there is a real problem with that, and there always will be, unfortunately, under our system at the moment. Can I say one of the really interesting things that's being said tonight about a lack of trust? We see it in the courts in a different way. For instance, under the previous studies, 38% of people were being identified during our courts as high-risk family violence. That's more like 60% during the data that we've been able to actually uncover at the moment. And we've only been able to uncover it because when people actually fill in a notice of risk, we actually then get them to actually fill in a questionnaire through a DOOR system, not perfect, but it's working very well. And we're actually uncovering so much more risk and identifying higher risk much more than we were. So people actually have the propensity to under-report family violence rather than over-report it. And I think that's been a misconception in our society for a long time, and it's quite a daunting prospect.
And that also, though, raises another issue when it comes to resources. You do red flag, you do wrap services around people who you see are a greater risk. However, you rely on outsourced services for that.
Absolutely.
We've just heard how strained they are.
Oh, look, absolutely. Can I just actually say what a fantastic job they do with the extraordinarily difficult circumstances they're in, and so often under-resourced. I want to really, say we're just so grateful to them. We do rely very heavily upon outsourcing a lot of these services, and there's some fantastic people doing it. But again, it's all about resources, which I'm sure you want to speak to.
Yeah, well, yes, thank you very much. I do family violence risk assessments for women who have not been picked up in the family court. In the DOORs, because the DOORs, it's a risk assessment, and I think the problem is the women think, great, it's there, it's going to be good, but it's a tick box, yes, no, you don't really get to sit down and exactly explain your situation. And just this week, I've had, and I mean, risk assessments are only as good as what the judges understand to be evidence-based risk factors as well. So only this week we presented a report that talked about historical family violence, which is an evidence-based risk factor, the fact that the perpetrator had criminal charges and was found guilty of other assault against this woman as well, and there were mental health and substance abuse, misuse issues and things like that. And the judge actually said, that's historical, the family violence, that's not now, and that's another court. So I don't need to deal with that. And just absolutely flatly refused to believe there was family violence. This woman is at serious risk and there's nowhere to go with it. So one of the things I think we've done great in Victoria has been our risk assessments, the MARAM, the Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Management Program, the risk assessments around victims, survivors, children and perpetrators, very nuanced, leading the country, but it's no good if it just sits on a bit of paper. We have to continue. I know people get training, but again, I read a child protection report just this week that listed all those evidence-based risk factors and then didn't make the conclusion that there was serious risk. So it's only as good as embedding that training. You need that family violence lens on these risk assessments and these cases. And I guess I see the ones that fall through the cracks, and it's heartbreaking.
We are almost out of time for the formal part of our panel. The 6 o'clock news is upon us. I do want to say an enormous thank you to everyone who has shared their insights and their experiences, and to the panel here who's been with us, the Chief Commissioner, the Chief Justice, to Christina and to Karen, but also to everyone else who has participated. And of course, after 6 o'clock though, we will open this up. I really want to hear from you. If you are listening at home, what do you think is the answer? 1300 222 774 is the number. Please join the conversation. Some of our panel will be here. More questions can be asked, more questions can be raised. And even if we've just put a spotlight on some potential solutions, whether that's better information sharing, whether it's things like mandatory behaviour change for violators of intervention orders, let's hope words can turn to action.